Well, a lady was driving. She came to an intersection. When she got to the intersection, she stopped, and a guy came over to her window and knocked on her window and asked her for some money. And she rolled her window down, and she started looking through her purse. And she finally found a $1 bill. And as she pulls it out and she reaches out the window to give it to him, she says, "Sir, I just want you to know, I'm not doing this because you deserve this or you earn this. I'm doing this because it makes me happy." And so the guy, as he was reaching for it, he said, "Oh, thank you so much." And he said, "Well, why don't you just dig into your purse a little more and pull out a $20 bill, and then you can feel super great about yourself." Man, I thought that was funny. Never mind. Try again next week, I guess. Hey, we are in week number 4 of David. And the first week we looked at the presence of God and the importance of the presence of God, daily living and walking in the presence of God and what that looks like. And then in week 2, we looked at the call of God, that David was called by God. And then last week we looked at David and Goliath. And this week we're looking at the hand of God, just being all over David. When things weren't going well, when things weren't good, God was still involved and God was still moving. And so listen, sometimes even though we can't see it, even though we can't feel it, that does not mean that God is not doing what only God can do. And so today, if you have your Bibles, we're going to go from chapter 18 to chapter 22 in 1 Samuel. We're going to cover a lot of scripture today, but I want to paint a picture for you so that you can begin to understand what's taking place. And in the first thing I want us to look at today is this: you can't control how people treat you or respond to you. You can't control how people treat you or respond to you. David, after being anointed king, is being chased by Saul, and Saul hates him. Saul is trying to kill him. Saul's throwing spears at him. Saul's chasing him all over the place. It said in verse 2, it says this: Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his family. It says in verse 5 that David was so successful that Saul gave him a high ranking in the army that pleased all the troops and Saul's officials as well. And then David was doing so well that they were singing a song as David's coming back into town. And it says Saul has slain his thousands in verse 7, but David his tens of thousands. And then right under that, it says this: and Saul was very angry. And it says this: Saul, in verse 9, Saul kept a close eye on David. And then in verse 11, it says Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it at him. And he said, "I'll pin David to the wall." And David eluded him twice. Isn't it interesting that no matter what David did, David can't control how Saul responds? Sometimes, listen, I want you to, sometimes you do the right thing and people do the wrong thing to you. Sometimes you have integrity in the office and somebody who doesn't have integrity steals a deal, steals a promotion, steals the honor, steals the reward. When you did everything right, but yet their integrity was in question, and now they get the reward and the benefit for what you had done right. See, sometimes you do all the right things and you can't control how somebody else responds or what somebody else does. And that's really, really hard. We were driving, we went to Shawnee for the 4th to Heather's family. And so as we're driving down there, if you head down the turnpike, you know there's some construction area. So the speed changes. And so me being the safe, cautious, law-abiding citizen that I am, as the speed was changing, I was slowing down. Well, there was a guy behind me, and I mean, he's just riding my tail. And that drives me nuts. And as a young child, I learned something from my dad. When somebody rides your tail, the best thing to do is just let off the gas until you get down to zero. And, you just kind of let them know, like, back off. You don't have to do anything else. Just let it off and just slowly, just let that thing. And so I just started slowing down a little bit, and then we get out of the construction zone. When this guy drives by me, remember, I had done nothing wrong. I'm just driving, we're singing, we're having a good time, enjoying family. And all of a sudden, this guy comes by and he shows me his IQ. That's what my mom used to call it. They showed us their IQ. And so he drives by and he's showing me his IQ. And inside, I wanted to speed up. And normally, my normal response is I will yell. There's a little bit. This is where God's still working on me, is with road rage, because I yell at people a lot in the car. And so I didn't respond. The good thing is, my wife and my kids didn't even see it. I responded right. But here's the thing. There was nothing I could do to control that guy and what that guy did. Nothing. I was in the checkout line at Reese's this past week. And as I had got groceries, the cart is full. And I pull up and the cart's like full. And I pull up and there's this lady who's, she's probably about 60. And she's older than me, obviously. I mean, way older than me. And I push the cart up and I go around to start unloading and she starts unloading. And I go, man, you're just the sweetest thing. I go, thank you so much. And she looks at me with a straight face. And she goes, well, I always help the elderly. I go, what? I go, do I look that old? And she goes, you who said yes? Thank you. I don't even remember what happened, but no. So I'm going around. I'm like, I'll do it. You don't need to do that. I'm fine. And she goes, no, honestly. She goes, every time an elderly person comes up and their basket's full, I really want to help them so they don't strain themselves. So at this point, I'm like, how old do you think I am? Like, you've got a good 20, 25 on me for sure. And so I was like, all right. So I just backed up and acted like I was old and let her unload and pack my groceries. Because I was mad. So I was like, I'm not that old. And so I've got an appointment this next week. I'm getting my hair dyed and my beard dyed just to reflect my age. But then I'm at home. So here's the thing. You can't control what people say. You can't control what people do. I'm at home. And my youngest son yesterday looks at me and goes, Dad, what do you call those things on your forehead? Do you call those wrinkles or wisdom cracks? I said, I go, wisdom cracks. And so, but you can't, sometimes people just say things and you're just like, this hurts. Okay. And you just can't control it. Sometimes you want to. Sometimes you just want to grab somebody's, tongue and rip it out, or sometimes you just want to let people know. But here's the thing that you and I have to learn, and it will get us so far in life. You can't control other people. You can't control if they hurt you. You can't control if they say words that don't build you up but tear you down. Sometimes it's even people that you don't even expect it coming from. See, David never expected this. David showed up on the scene to help the Philistines, to fight the Philistines. He fought Goliath. Everybody loved David, but Saul hated him. And David is so confused, and we see through the rest of the day today, David's going around and he's asking Jonathan, it's his best friend, it's Saul's son, and he's like, why is your dad doing this? What have I done to deserve this? And then he marries Saul's daughter, Michal, and Michal loves him, and he's like, what have I done to deserve this? I don't understand. See, sometimes what people do, sometimes what people say, sometimes you don't deserve it. But listen, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't change their words. You can't make them act a certain way. You can't make them say a certain thing. You can't make them respond the way that you want. And so here's what you have to understand. Your response is what's important. That's thought number 2. Thought number 2 is this. You can control how you respond and how you treat people. Look at what it says about David in verse 12. Saul was afraid of David. Here's why. Because the Lord was with David. But he had departed from Saul. Saul was running from God. David was pursuing the heart of God. David was chasing after God. And Saul hated him because what Saul desired, he saw David had. What Saul wanted, he saw in David. In verse 14, it says this, in everything he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. Listen, you may not be able to control other people, but you can control how you respond and how you treat other people. Listen, you can't even control your spouse. Heather and I got into a fight 2 days ago. She's not in here, so I can tell the story. And I'm telling my version of the story because I have the mic. No, we got home, and this was Friday night. And we're sitting there, and she looks at me, and she's like, hey, you know what sounds really good? I'm like, what? And she's like, a really good steak. She's like, how does that sound to you? I was like, I don't care. So then she doesn't really say anything, kind of stops talking. She's on the phone with a friend, and she's like, you'll never believe, Johnny, I told him I wanted to go on a date, and he just ignored me. And he didn't even want to go. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, when did you say that? And she said, I wanted a steak. And I was like, I didn't get your code. I was like, sorry. And so I pick up the phone, I call the restaurant, make a reservation. And she's like, I'm not going now because it's a pity date. I'm like, I don't know what I need to do in this moment. And she's like, well, I'm not going now. It's a pity date. I don't want to go on a pity date with you. And I'm like, it's not a pity date. I didn't know you wanted to go. And she's like, yes, you did. I told you I wanted a steak. And you asked me, what does that sound? And I was like, I don't care. Like, I didn't care. And so here, you can't even control your spouse. The only thing you can control is the way you respond. So I did the right thing. After a little while, I walked in and I looked at her. And in all honesty, I said, babe, I forgive you. That did not go well. Let's just say the fight went to another level. So then I came back and I said, I'm sorry for not understanding your language because girls are pink, guys are blue. I didn't catch it. And so we're going to go on a date. But listen, you can't even control your spouse. But what you can control is the way you respond. See, and that's what's important. And this is where David's being chased by Saul. David's being run down. David's had spears thrown at him. David's sitting in the presence of Saul, playing the harp, and all of a sudden, Saul gets so mad, he picks up a spear and he throws it at David. David dodges it, picks up another one, throws another one at him. David dodges it. David now goes on the run. He's all over the place. Saul's chasing him, his army's chasing him. And David still, in spite of all that, David never says a bad thing about Saul. How many times has somebody done something or said something, and the response that you give matches what they've said? See, what if what God desires for our heart, God desires for our response, is that when somebody says something that we can't control, when somebody says something that's unjustified, what if we respond not the way we want to respond in our flesh, but what if we respond the way that God responded to us? What if we respond a little differently? What if we're no longer responding the same way that we used to always respond? See, there's a story in Luke chapter 7, 36 through 50. Jesus is invited to the house of these Pharisees. And when he comes to the door, normal custom is you're given some water to rinse off all the dust, clean your feet, clean your hands, pour some oil over your head, get a little better smell than sweating and walking and all the dirt and dust that's all over you. And so you get a little smell on you. But when Jesus came in, none of that happened. Well, there was a woman that was outside and she saw what was going on. And she was a woman, the Bible says, she was a sinful woman and she was known for her sin. And she sees what's taking place. She comes into the house with an alabaster jar, basically some perfume. And she begins to take that perfume and she begins to kneel at the feet of Jesus. And she's weeping. And the Bible says that her tears are what water the feet of Jesus. And her hair, she begins to dry his feet off. Then she takes the jar and she begins to put it in his hair and begins to wash his hair and his feet with that jar. And those that were sitting there begin to judge. And they're like, I can't believe that she's doing this. I can't believe that this woman, if Jesus only knew who this woman was, there's no way that he would let this woman do this. She has a terrible reputation. And Jesus says this, he says, therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven because of the great love that she's shown. And he says this, whoever has been forgiven much loves much, but whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Can I tell you this? Our response often is dictated by the way that we view our forgiveness that has been given to us by God. It's easy to forgive when you realize how much you've truly been forgiven. It's easy when somebody says something. It's easy when somebody hurts you. It's easy when somebody doesn't treat you the way that you feel like you need to be treated. It's easy to look and go, man, I forgive you. I understand. Because listen, I've been forgiven much. I don't deserve. That's why singing that song was so perfect today. Because it's at the feet of Jesus. His greatness and love. That's where we find it. We lay our crowns down at the feet of Jesus and we cry, holy, holy, holy. Why do we do that? Because we realize I've been forgiven much. And so in that forgiveness, I forgive anything because I've been forgiven of everything. And so my response is a natural response because I realize who I am and what I've done. Realize that it's only the grace of God that I stand up here and I'm able to preach. I realize that God has forgiven me of great things. And in that forgiveness, now I have the opportunity to forgive. So when somebody hurts, it's not a grudge. It's a natural response of love and forgiveness because I've been loved when I shouldn't have been loved. And I was forgiven when I didn't deserve forgiveness. And so here's the thing. You can't control other people. But you can control your response. And your response reflects how you view the forgiveness that Jesus has given you. Thought number 3. You see who you truly are by how people love you. Saul was chasing David, and in chapter 19, verse 11, his wife, Michal, says this: if you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. So Michal let David down through a window, and he fled and he escaped. In chapter 20, verse 4, Jonathan said this to David: whatever you want me to do, I will do for you. Whatever you want me to do. Listen, here's the thing. Who you are is reflected by the way people love you. David was loved. And we're going to see an even greater picture of this here in just a minute. But listen, how does your family treat you and respond to you? How do your friends treat you and respond to you? Can I ask you this? Maybe if you don't have a lot of people around you, could it not be that it's the other people? Could it be that it may be you? And maybe what needs to change is your heart of love for people. And the way that you treat people and the way that you respond to people. There's been times Heather's told me, you need to stop talking so mean to the kids. I'm like, I'm not. Could it be that you don't even realize what you've become? Sometimes I don't even realize the tone and the voice. Sometimes I don't even realize the response that I'm giving. And I need somebody else to just grab me and kind of shake me and just say, hey, this isn't who you are. This isn't the person you are. You need to respond different. You need to act a little different. You need to be a little different. And we got a good roof on this thing. I'll tell you this. When I never thought, but when I became a pastor, you start getting all these buildings. Then storms comes, rain comes, all this stuff. And I'm like, please don't have a leak. Like, please don't leak anywhere. Like, please just everything hold together. It's weird how things change. But here's what I want you to understand. Listen, could it be that maybe what needs to happen in your life is this? You need to step back and you just need to reflect and you just need to look and you just need to see. Man, how do people look at me? How do people view me? Who's around me? Because how I act reflects who's going to be around. If you've got a lot of people around, I would say you're good, kind. But if you don't have very many, then maybe some things need to change in your heart and in your life so that you can begin to have those people around. Thought number 4 is this: your word is your bond. Your word is your character. It said, Saul promised Jonathan in the chapters prior to this, chapter 20. Saul had promised Jonathan, I will not kill David. So Jonathan and David come up with a plan, and to basically, because Jonathan's like, you don't need to run, David. My dad's not going to kill you. And David's like, no, he's going to kill me. They come up with a plan to basically get Jonathan to talk to his dad and just his dad reveal his true heart. And his dad does right here. It says Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan. And then in verse 32, it says this, Jonathan says, why should he be put to death? What has he done? Jonathan asked his father. Saul hurled a spear at him to kill him. And then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. After he had already said, no, I'm not going to do this, Jonathan believed his father. Can I ask you, whatever happened to a person being a person of their word? I remember my grandpa talking about, now my mom and dad, but my grandpa would talk about when he would make oil deals. He had an oil company, and when he would go and he would make these deals, what he would do is he said, I don't have a contract, I just have a handshake. We sat down over a cup of coffee, we talked about it, we came to an agreement, we shook hands, we walked away. There were no lawyers involved, there was no contract involved. Like, we just shook hands, and this is how we did things. And so my mom and dad, when they were getting all the paperwork and everything like that for the oil company together, they're like, where's this? And he's like, I don't have that. It was a handshake. I don't need a contract. I trust the guy. Whatever happened to a person being a man or a woman of character, of their word? Whatever happened to us just being able to shake hands, and if I tell you something, I'm gonna do it. And if I say this is who I am and this is what I'm gonna do, then that's who I am and that's what I'm gonna do. Listen, today we've found ourselves in a world where we don't trust what people say. Even good people. Even what we would consider honest people. We don't trust that what they're saying and what they're doing is truly their word and what they're going to do, and they're going to honor that. That somehow what they're trying to do is manipulate it for themselves to be better, to get better deals. And so could I just challenge us? Can we just be people of character? Can we just be people of our word? That when we say it, we don't need a contract. We don't need all these people around. We don't need to get, you just know that if I tell you something, I'm going to do it. I'm going to honor it. Because that's what character is. Listen, Jonathan so bad wanted to believe his father. He so bad wanted to trust that my dad has told me this. I've had conversations, David, like I know you and I are best friends, but I talked to my dad and he told me he was not going to kill you. And David's like, I've got the spears to prove it. Jonathan's like, I don't think that happened. And then all of a sudden, the character of Saul is revealed. Here's the thing, pressure always reveals character. Pressure always reveals character. David was supposed to be at a dinner with them. David wasn't there. The pressure began to build, so Saul lost his mind. Can I tell you, it's not the character when it doesn't matter. It's a character when the pressure's on. That's what truly matters. Can we have character even when the pressure's on? The last thing is this. Thought number 5. You are better together. 1 Samuel 22, 1 and 2. It says this, David's being chased again. And so it says David left Gath and he escaped to a cave. And it says when his brothers and fathers and household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress, in doubt, discontented, gathered around him. And he became their commander, about 400 men. Can I paint this picture for you? David has been chased out. David's the one who, he's just a young kid, anointed king, defeated Goliath, and then God's hand is all over him. He's faithful to God. God's hand's all over him. Every time he goes out to battle, David wins, and it's phenomenal victories. Now they're singing songs about him, and the king hates it. Everybody in the army loved David. They wanted to fight for David. They wanted to follow David because they saw God's hand all over it. Saul chased him out of town to a point to where now David finds himself. Remember, David has done nothing wrong. But David finds himself in a cave alone. He's by himself. He's all alone. And then look at who shows up. You remember in week number 2, we talked about the anointing of David. We talked about his brother, his dad, not even bringing him in as an option to be king. And then last week we talked about David fighting Goliath and how when David showed up, his brothers didn't even want him there, and they were like, why are you here? We know your wicked heart. We know who you truly are. But then when David is alone by himself, look who shows up. Here's what I want you to understand. Just because you have a fight doesn't mean it's over. See, some of you give up on relationships. Some of you give up on marriages. Some of you give up on family way too quickly. Because you have a disagreement, you have an argument, you get hurt, your feelings get hurt. You don't agree with what's said, you don't agree with what's done, so you cut off all ties and you stop having a relationship. I want you to see David is all alone by himself. Word gets out, and who shows up? His dad walks in. His dad shows up. His brothers show up. It says his household shows up. Listen, here's what I want you to understand. You are the greatest hope for your family. You're the greatest hope that your family has, because some of them, they find themselves in a cave right now. They find themselves alone right now. And what they need is they need the hope of Jesus. And you are that hope, not to disconnect, not to run away, not to abandon, not to be there, not to look and point your finger. Because I'm sure his brothers wanted to point and say, see, I told you, you're in a cave by yourself. You're not that big of a deal. You're not that important. You're not that great. But it says they showed up, and then it says this, David became their leader. See, some of you need to realize that you've got some people around you that are in a cave, and they need you to show up. You've got some people that are hurting, and they need you to show up. But I want you to see the people that show up, because oftentimes it's not the people that we expect that come and show up. It says this, all those who were distressed. There were some hurting people. Some worried people. There were some anxious people. There were some fearful people. They were distressed. And they hear David's in the cage, so they say, I'm going with David. I don't know what to do, but I'm going with David. It says those that had doubt. I don't know what they doubted. I don't know if they doubted David as a leader. I don't know if they doubted Saul as king. I don't know if they doubted God. I don't know if they doubted themselves, but they doubted. It says those that were discontented. They weren't happy. They weren't happy with where they were. They weren't happy with what's going on. They weren't happy with the situation that they were in. These were not people that had it all together. This wasn't the generals that were showing up. These were people that were hurting. Because here's the thing, oftentimes hurt people help hurt people. Oftentimes you don't realize it, but it's the ones that have been hurt, the ones that are going through some stuff that show up and help when other people are going through some stuff. Because listen, if you haven't been through it, then it's hard for you to understand. And these are the people that were walking through it, that were hurt, and the pain was deep. And they show up, and they find David in a cave because he's running. Like, man, I'm not happy. I'm doubting. I'm discouraged. So David, I can help you. Listen, here's it. You need to find some people in your life that are those cave people for you. That when you find yourself by yourself, when you find yourself alone, when you find yourself in a pit, when you find yourself, you just don't know how you're going to go on. You don't know what you're going to do. You feel like everything's crumbling around you. You feel like you don't deserve what's happening to you and it's falling apart. You need some cave people that are going to show up. You need some family members that are going to walk through the door. You need some brothers that are going to stand with you no matter what. Even though they've said some things, they're going to stand with you, and you know they got my back. You got some friends, they've been through some things. They've seen some things, they've experienced some things. And you know I've got some cave people. Because I understand being in this cave and letting my mind run and letting my mind go is not what I need to do. What I need to do is I need to have some people around me that are going to build me up, that are going to lift me up. And this is what I love about this story and this picture right here of David. So when he was down, when he was alone, he had some people show up. He had some cave people. Listen, my prayer is this, is that our church becomes a church of cave people. That when people walk through the door, it doesn't matter what you've done, doesn't matter what you've been through, doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't matter what you've experienced, but you've got some people that'll come and that will rally around you and point you to Jesus and help you get out of that dark, lonely time that you were in. They will pick you up and they will help you. We need to be a church that's got some cave people. And so maybe today, you've walked through the doors and maybe today you've been hurt. I just want to encourage you, there's nothing you can do to control somebody else. But you can control who you are. And your response often reflects your relationship with the Lord and the forgiveness that you recognize that He's given you. Character matters. Who you are truly matters. A handshake matters. Your word matters. And find some people, be a cave person, and find some people that'll be cave people with you. Will you pray with me?